when I'm looking for a new terminal to use, one of my absolute basic requirements, I won't even consider a terminal without this feature, is true color support. But I've had a few people ask me, what does this actually mean? And I've also had a few people sort of confused about what it means as well. So I thought, hey, why don't I go and just make a video on the topic? So to understand what true color is, I think we also need to understand what a terminal is, because there's a bit of confusion here as well. So what we typically call a terminal isn't really a terminal. What it actually is a terminal emulator. So a terminal would be a piece of hardware like this. So this is a VT100. This was a physical terminal that we used before everyone just had personal computers. And this would like hook into a mainframe or some other sort of big computing device. So this was effectively just a screen with a keyboard attached, and it would send commands to an external computer. So this is a physical terminal, and for many years, the terminal emulators that we used on our computers would also emulate a lot of the hardware limitations that came with terminals as well. But as computers have gotten faster, and we've gotten to the point now where you can do things like render 4K video and play a video game at the same time, there's not really as much of a reason to strictly limit yourself as there was in the past. So some examples of terminals that broke out of this were things like Kitty with its image module, so you can actually have proper images rendered in your terminal. Or a more general one would be how you have a lot of terminals that support W3M images. Or maybe a more general one, even than that, would be anti-aliased fonts. And of course, the topic of today's video, which is true color. Now, also to understand what true color is, we need to understand the different sort of color palettes that a terminal can have. Now, the most basic one is plain ASCII. So plain ASCII means there is no color. So you have the text, it's lit up, and you have the background, it's not lit up. And that is all you have. So you have one color. That is a monochromatic terminal. This is sort of just a relic of the past. We don't really see these anymore. There's not really any reason to do a monochrome terminal on modern hardware, unless you really like seeing monochromatic output. From this point on, I'll just call a terminal emulator a terminal just because it's a bit easier to say. Now, the general baseline for a modern terminal is a 16 color palette. So you have 8 normal colors and you have 8 bright colors. You might also see 8 color terminals, but this is generally just limited to your TTY. For anything that's running on an X server or inside of Wayland, the general minimum is going to be a 16 color palette, and you've already experienced this 16 color palette before. So if you've ever went and manually set a terminal color scheme, those 16 colors that you modify, those are the base 16 colors of your terminal, and each of those colors has a defined name. So the way that you actually print these colors out is with an Ansi escape sequence. So that'll look a little something like this. This graphic does a really good job at showing how to actually write out an Ansi escape sequence. So as you can see, the color black is defined to be 30, the color red is defined to be 31, green 32, so on and so forth, and then you've got the bright version of those colors as well. Now, if we test one of those out, so I've got an example that I've got on my other screen here, so if we just paste this in, what we're doing right here, this \x1b is basically the same thing as \033, they mean the exact same thing. It's just a different way to write out the escape character. And then what we're doing is we're saying we want to print out color 31, and then I'm basically coloring this bit of text right here. So if we print this out, as you can see, it's printed out as red. So if we change this from being 31 to say being 36, that's going to print out my cyan color. Or we could change that over from being 36 to being, I don't know, what's the light variant of cyan, so that's 96. So print that out, and that is the light version of cyan. Now I've got my bright and my normal colors defined to be as the same color, but if you don't do that, then there'll be a slightly different shade of cyan. Unless, and this is why I think that a true color terminal is a much better way to handle this, unless you define your colors to mean things that aren't actually defined within the Ansi escape sequence. So there's nothing stopping you from, say, defining your cyan to be purple, or defining your red to be black. And this is what programs like Pywall do. So they'll set a color scheme that doesn't align with the Ansi escape codes. So say if you want to do something like set a 16 color Vim theme, well, the way that looks is actually going to change based on the terminal that you're running it on, because if they have a different terminal theme, because if you say you want the comments to be red, you're defining that as the Ansi escape sequence red. And if I define my red Ansi escape sequence to be green, well, they'll be green instead. This is the big problem with relying on a 16 color palette. Now, the next type of color palette we have is a 256 color palette. So this is 16 Ansi colors, 24 grays, and then 216 other colors. Now, most modern terminals will fall into this category. Pretty much anything that isn't a true color terminal is probably going to be a 256 color terminal. And one good example of this is something like EuroXVT, but there are so many other examples I could bring up that would take an entire video to list them all. EuroXVT, though, is a pretty popular example. Now, for these 216 colors, generally they're going to be derived from your 16 color palette. So if you set something funky for that, well, then the rest of your 216 colors are also going to be kind of funky. So if you do something like, say, Grovebox, then potentially the rest of your colors are also going to be kind of funky as well. Now, it's kind of up to the terminal how they handle this, though. So some terminals will have a set 216 colors, some will derive them, and some, like Alacrity, actually give you complete control over what goes in that color palette. So in Alacrity, you can actually manually set every single one of the 216 colors. So if you want to have more than 16 colors that you have control of, something like Alacrity is probably a good choice to use. Now, I've got a script here that'll let me print out what my 256 colors are, so I'll include it in the description down below if you want to run it for yourself. So that, I believe I've called color 256. Yes, I have. So run this, and as you can see, it's printed out every single one of the colors that my terminal is using. So if you don't have a 256 color terminal, this will still work. It'll just obviously only print the first 16 colors as opposed to printing 256 colors. So looking at what's going on here, you can see we have our base 16 colors, and then we have our 216 colors, and then down the bottom here, we have our 24 grays. So I haven't actually controlled what any of these colors are going to be, except obviously my base 16 colors. So I believe that these are actually being derived from this color set here. Once again though, with Alacrity, you actually have the ability to manually set any of these 216 colors. Now I think you can also set for grays, but don't quote me on that. And as with our 16 colors, there is an Ansi escape sequence we can use to print these colors out. So that'll look a little something like this right here. Now it's slightly different, but the idea is roughly the same. So at the start, once again, we have our escape character. So \x1b, which is the same thing as \033. But the form in here is slightly different. So this time we have 38:5. What this means is we're going to print out one of our 256 colors. And then after that, after the next semicolon, is where you actually say which color you're going to print out. So in this case, we're going to be printing out with this color right here. So number 48. So if we just run this, as you can see, it's printed out that color. And because the first 16 colors are actually a part of the 256 color palette, we can still use those. So let's say we want to print out with color 1. That's going to print out with red. So if we do that, change the 48 in here to being 1, and that'll print out with red. And the same is going to be true for the rest of the 254 colors as well. Like with the 16 color palette, the 256 color palette has the exact same application theming problem. If I set a 256 color theme for Vim, well, the look of it is going to change based on the terminal that I use it in. And this is where true color comes in. So true color, the simplest way to explain it is full RGB. So this will let you do the full 16 million color range that is available within RGB. And also, it's independent from your terminal color scheme. So I've got my theme set up like this, but this is not going to affect any of the RGB colors that I can print out. Now, I've also got a script to test this, which I've called color 10-bit, because another name for true color support is 10-bit color support. So if we just run this, as you can see, it prints out a rainbow. So if we were to extend the width of the terminal, it'll print out a rainbow that goes across the entire width. So if you run this in something like EuroXVT, what it's going to do is some of it's going to be missing color, some of it's going to try to approximate colors, and it just won't look as nice as it looks right here. If we want to print out an RGB color to our terminal, it's very similar to what we did with the 256 colors, but the escape sequence changes just a little bit. So if we just print this out right here, as you can see, we've changed the 5 in here to being a 2, and we also have to specify the full RGB color that we're going to be using. So instead of just saying we want to use color 48, in this case we have to say we want to use red 10, green 100, blue 250. So if we just run this, as you can see, it prints out a blue like this. So if we just change this up to something, I don't know, a bit less blue. Let's change this to being, I don't know, 50. And as you can see now, this is sort of a mossy green color. Now, if you're following along with the complaints I brought up earlier about setting color schemes, you can probably understand why I like true color now. And the reason is entirely aesthetic, but I would argue that aesthetic's actually really, really useful. So rather than relying on a color palette where the meaning of each of the colors will change based on the terminal that you're using true color allows for your colors to be consistent across every single terminal you use. So if I take my Vim theme and I put it in Alacrity, it looks exactly the same as it would in ST, as it would in console, as it would in the Windows PowerShell even. So this is why I really like true color. And the thing is that I really, really like syntax highlighting. And the thing I like about syntax highlighting is you can kind of turn off a lot of your brain and just scan for stuff that you know you're looking for. So say you're looking for a comment, and the theme that I use in every single editor is a sort of a Visual Studio dark theme. So I know exactly what green the comments are. So if I'm just looking for comments, I can just turn my brain off, ignore anything that isn't the exact green that I know a comment is. Whereas if you have a theme that's constantly changing based on the terminal that you're in, well, you can't really get that same level of understanding about the colors that are used in your application. Now, I know this is very much a personal preference thing, but for me, I've gotten very, very comfortable with this color theme, and if I move to something else, I feel like my workflow is just going to be a bit slower. Obviously, I have gotten used to different color schemes before. When I first started programming, it was in PyCharm, and then when I did some Java, it was in Eclipse, and then I eventually moved to Visual Studio, and then Visual Studio Code, and now I'm in Vim. And I've ended up settling on a theme, but I have gotten used to different themes as I've moved around different applications. So it's not like it can't be done, but I feel like getting yourself used to the syntax highlighting you're using and taking advantage of what the meaning of colors are in the application that you want to be using, I think will really increase your productivity. So if you want to try out a true color terminal, there are tons of examples now. They were a bit sparse a few years back, but right now there's actually tons of them. So a good example would be something like ST, or if you're on KDE, you already have one because you have console. Another one is iTerm2, or Alacrity, or Kitty, or even things like the Windows PowerShell. And I didn't know this, but apparently command.exe is also a true color terminal. So, do you need a true color terminal? Do I need a true color terminal? No, absolutely not. No one actually needs a true color terminal. You'll be perfectly fine with a 16 color terminal. It might be a bit limiting for setting themes, so maybe just get yourself something like EuroXVT and use a 256 color terminal. But if you really care about colors and you really care about the meaning of your colors and your colors being consistent across every terminal you use, maybe give true color a shot, because I think that you'll really end up liking it. So I think that's pretty much everything for me, but before I go, I want to thank my patrons. So a special thank you to Joachim, Nathan, Andrew, Montazar, Peter De Rue, Tony Donald, Hilary, and Zilva. If you want to join the Patreon, there'll be a link to that down below, as well as my Amazon affiliate links where you can buy the gear I use in this channel, or anything else you want, and I'll get a small kickback for it. Also remember to go check out my podcast, that is Tech Over Tea, available on Library and YouTube, and anywhere you listen to audio podcasts for the audio version. Also remember to go check out this channel, available on Library, BitTube, and also BitChute. And remember to smash the like button and leave me a comment down below, and remember to subscribe and ding the little bell icon down below as well. So I think that's pretty much everything for me, and I'm out.